Hello and welcome to today's episode of the Morgan Latif Spotlight Sessions. I'm Matt, one of the consultants here at Morgan Latif. Today I had the pleasure of speaking with Pooja Aggarwal, a member of the leadership team at Women in Chemicals, who are a global non-profit dedicated to the empowering women across the chemical industry. Alongside her work with Women in Chemicals, Pooja brings a wealth of experience in R&D, business development and marketing, and holds a PhD in organic chemistry from Penn State University. We had a really fascinating conversation about the transition from academia into industry, looking at some of the cultural differences, the relevance of transferable skills, and why the diversity often seen in academic settings doesn't always translate into the chemical sector. Pooja also shared some great advice for researchers who are considering a similar move, particularly around how to position academic experience for industry roles. As a proud new sponsor of Women in Chemicals, we were especially excited to share this episode. It really was a thought-provoking and insightful discussion, and I certainly took a lot away from it. So without further ado, let's jump in. Pooja, thank you so much for joining us today. We have a few questions that we'd like to put to you that hopefully you can share some really interesting insights on. You have a really exciting background in transition into industry, and we'd like to delve a little bit deeper into that and get your insights on a few really important topics that we see across the chemical industry and the broader industry world at the moment. So to kick us off, how do you see that international academic environments help build the kind of adaptability and global mindset that industry increasingly values?
Yeah, well, first of all, I just want to say, thank you so much, for the kind introduction. I'm just so happy to be here to speak with you. And here at Women in Chemicals, we are very glad for your recent platinum sponsorship of our organization. Your support, just means a lot. So just thank you very much. So, yeah, and I guess I'll just dive in. You said, how
Yeah,
does
please do.
Yeah, so I think in order to understand how academia, builds that kind of adaptability and global mindset that, industry is increasingly, values, I think you kind of have to understand, the background. Life in academia is very different. So it's after you've finished your bachelor's degree, you're doing your postgraduate studies, and there's a lot of opportunity for social bonding, through shared classes or research groups and, various organized social outings and events. So all of these interactions really kind of develop a good foundation to foster a deeper understanding of diverse backgrounds and mindsets of your peers. And then at this time in their lives, it's very uncommon to find young families. So all of that helps build the global mindset, as right now, industry is so volatile, and being open to new ideas and understanding people's perspectives and motivations, that really, really helps and is valued in industry. So, global exposure really helped help in several skills, like cross-cultural communication. I had a friend in a different lab, and he spoke a different language, and he wrote his thesis, and it was very well written. All the science was there. He was a very sharp guy, all the data. It was very, very nice flow. However, it was kind of, I guess you could say, transliterated from his language into English. And so because I understood his background, his cultural background, and I understood the science he wanted to convey, I was able to bridge that gap and really fix the grammar and the vocabulary. And then, it was very well received by his committee. And then he did very well after that. And then there's other skills, like flexibility, understanding other cultures and different various ways of doing things. So I had the good fortune to have the experience of academia in the US as well as the UK. And we would purify some of our compounds that we would make. And in the US, we had a system that was called like house air. So that just means that the air kind of travels through the lab by the hoods, and there's a tap that you just turn on, and that's how you control the air pressure. And so that's what we would use. However, in the UK, we did not have that system. We had something called a bellows, which is a handheld air compressor. And that's how you would achieve airflow through your system. And it was quite nice. It was just a different way of achieving the similar goal. And, if you go into industry and you're in a small company, they don't have house air, you can always say, hey, I know of a system that we can use, a different technique. So I think that's all valued very much. And then problem solving is another big one that, industry values. So for example, again, in the University of Nottingham, we had a tea room. And, coming straight from the US as a PhD, I didn't know what a tea room was, and I didn't understand the culture around the tea room and how important it is to take breaks and have tea and biscuits and have a little chat, with your friends, and just kind of have like a reset in the day. And I really kind of enjoyed that. But in the beginning, I didn't quite understand. So it was open, not very consistently. It wasn't open from say 8 to 2. It was open for a half an hour, and then they'd have a break, and then they'd be open again. And so the offices were closed at certain times and open at certain times. And so I kind of had to work around the closures so that I could get my documents in order, because I was on a work visa. So to get all my documents in order, I'd be like, oh, every time I'd go, it'd be closed. So just trying to work around that and trying to understand, the culture, and then embracing it as well. I ended up enjoying my tea breaks. So, I think industry just really values all of that. It helps with communication, flexibility, problem solving, just understanding that there are various ways of achieving, doing the same thing.
Yeah, interesting. And it's funny how such small cultural nuances can make such a difference to how you then think about things moving forward. And I'm a big advocate of tea breaks myself, so it's funny to hear you talk about it. That leads us really nicely on to the next topic I wanted to speak to you about. And I was interested to hear your thoughts on how culture differs from academia into the chemical industry, because you touched upon a little bit of cultural aspects there in your last point. How do you see the differences between the two?
Yeah, I would say there are a few differences. Academia, I would say, is a bit more diverse. I've had so many different colleagues from all over the US, whether it was in the US and all over the globe. Same in the UK, I had colleagues from all over Europe and Middle East. Whereas in industry, I find it a bit more homogeneous. I think in academia, it's more concentrated, as I was saying earlier, about life stage. It's more of an earlier life stage where it's rare to see young families. Whereas in industry, it's quite nice. You have quite large spectrum of life experiences. You have young families with older children. Some have grown and flown. Some are close to retirement age. And then, academia can also be a bit self-focused. You can kind of be in your bubble and your research, and, but there are times when you do have some collaboration across labs. But overall, I would say it's more, self-focused. And then in the industrial side, it's nice to, collaborate with cross-functional teams. Every team has certain parameters they have to work within. So that, proposes another challenge to work, because you're not just focusing on your department, you're also focusing on everybody's, limitations, and trying to come together to find a common goal, to solve a problem. So it's kind of nice. You get to learn different aspects of business. However, in academia, there's a lot of freedom to make a lot of decisions. You're driving your own project, and you're at your own pace. There's not as many limitations. However, in industry, it's more, I guess, hierarchy based. And in my experience, I think it was mostly due to time and budget constraints. So when I was a medicinal chemist, there were two groups trying to move towards a target that we were working on. And one group, they were doing very well, they were making progress. And then our group, it was just a different idea and it just wasn't working as well. And so I think about after a month or two of working on it, we had to pivot. And so, in academia, I think we may have worked on it a bit longer, but I think in the end we would have to change direction as well. So I think in industry, things move a bit faster due to time and budget, which is interesting because it's a new challenge. And then I also found, industry to be a bit more structured in terms of, rules and regulations. So for example, when I was a process chemist doing the safe scale up of active pharmaceutical ingredients, we had certain codes to get into the lab. It was more secure. It was a highly regulated environment versus in academia. You can just walk right into the labs. There's not much security. And then documentation is also another one. We had to document everything, every gram of material that we were using, anything we would take out, all the waste material that we would create. Those were all documented. And then finally, there's formal performance reviews. Academia, we definitely don't have anything like that where they're evaluating several aspects of your job. And then, also in industry, you have so many opportunities for training. For example, I had a formal management course that was offsite for my direct reports. So that was a nice experience. So in industry, you just have a more variety of, exposure to work functions and life stages. And so it just moves a bit faster.
Yeah, I can imagine for some, and I don't know how you found this, but going through that transition of maybe not having to account for every little thing that you do, every little bit of waste, every product you take out, to then probably the extreme end of the scale where everything has to be accounted for. And then when you add on the performance reviews on top of that, I can imagine it was quite intense change is probably a good word to use. But yeah, I guess, when you think about that transition in general, you don't think about the smaller parts like that. And again, it probably goes back to the autonomy and the freedom, right? Where you're so used to doing things in a certain way, and then suddenly you're going into a super structured environment where everything's looked at through a fine-tooth comb. So yeah, really interesting comments there.
Yeah.
So
Thanks.
moving on to the more skill set side of things, Pooja, what skills acquired in academia have been most valuable to you in your industry role? And were there any that maybe didn't translate as well as expected?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question, Matt. There's so many skills. Honestly, I could go on. But yeah, I would say a lot of my management and leadership of teams and projects, all due to really problem solving. I was managing, groups in academia as well as industry in terms of training weekly on academic concepts. And then every day, just training everyone on how to improve their processes, via various variables like, temperature or amounts of material and things like that. In academics, I was also in charge of, 6 different projects at the same time. And I had to quickly prioritize and organize all of my work and, then make a case for my boss and say, I think these projects are meant to move forward and why. And these projects perhaps need a bit more time. And these projects, maybe we should just, forego. So it just, it really helps you advocate for yourself. And then that translates into industry very well. So again, when I was a medicinal chemist, I was, working in business development and writing target product profiles, basically trying to help the company on strategy on which targets we should be working on based on competitive intelligence and markets. And, I was able to have, a meeting with senior management and present to them, we think these targets should be moving forward and why. And so it kind of really helps drive business. So when you're, training in academia and you're like working on things, you don't realize that this can have a huge impact in industry. And I think they really appreciate that. And then, of course, advocating for yourself, in terms of promotions as well, trying to, tell people that this is the reason why I should be moving forward. And then, of course, in order to do all this, you need great communication skills. And in academics, you definitely work on, both written as well as verbal skills. Every week, there are meetings with the group and your boss, and you kind of learn how to storytell as well. You'll kind of give a summary of what you've done, so you have a little bit of background, a little bit of what you're doing, what you're working on at the moment, and where you want to go forward, and where the problems are in order to get there. And then there's a lot of different ways to present. There's poster sessions throughout the year. You have international meetings. And so you kind of have to sit back and look at the big picture and see, what's the point of this story? Like, how do I want to present it? And who am I presenting to? And how I should tell the story. And while you're doing that, using software to illustrate what you're doing is such a great tool, especially now everybody is in the age of AI.
Yeah.
It's ever so important. So I think we had specific software that we would use to draw molecules and things. And, of course, learning or knowing, Microsoft Suite and PowerPoint and all of that really helps you to learn newer software. So when I was in industry, I learned quickly a software called BioRender for biological systems. And then these days, everyone's using Canva. It certainly helped me for my marketing. So, all those skills are really, really important. And then finally, if you can show that you can collaborate and be able to work on a team as that's something that's really valued as well. I had a project in academia. I was working with a materials engineer on a 3D printing project. So we were printing a vessel in which we would do the chemistry. And so it was a new challenge for me because I had only worked in my little organic chemistry bubble. And now I had to learn a little bit about materials and keep all the chemicals compatible with the materials. So for example, I had to be cognizant of the temperature. I didn't want the material to warp. I didn't want the material to corrode, so I couldn't use anything too acidic, things like that. I had some other limitations, and it was quite interesting to solve a problem with more, limitations. And that just translates, and then you kind of tweak the methods that you're doing in order to improve the process. You're using different strategies and continuous improvement to do that. And that really helped me in industry. When I was doing process chemistry, I was able to solve a big issue. I suggested a certain solvent to add to the process. We had a safety issue, so that really mitigated that. We had foaming in the vessel, and we didn't want that, exploding or anything.
That doesn't sound good.
No, not at all. So that really helped solve that problem. And not only that, it was compatible with downstream events, which was great. And then we were able to save $700 per kilo in production costs. So, that's a huge impact, when you are making, saving money and making revenue for the industry. I think we don't really think about that in academia. You're just thinking about improving methods, but, it has a huge impact in industry. So all of these things are really advantageous. And then, you also asked about skills that perhaps don't translate. So
if any in particular stand out for you?
Yeah. So again, funnily enough, I think communication, academics they know so much information, and they're very excited to tell you everything. And sometimes sometimes they go off on a tangent. And I think it's something that you have to work on, is being concise. When you're working with multiple teams, people just want a high level picture, just one or two sentences, and that's it. So that's something I think people, need to work on when they get into industry. And then As I was saying earlier, it's not really a skill that doesn't translate, but a factor to consider is the time and budget, the constraints that you have. And so it's just
Yeah.
learned and developed, I think, in industry. So.
Interesting. It's funny because you mentioned communication as, a translatable skill, and you're absolutely right, because having the ability to speak to different types of people is absolutely essential. And actually, when you think about it as well, it's what you're communicating to them is something that doesn't necessarily translate well, because you need to be more concise at the same time. So a balance of the two. And I really like how you spoke about technology being a big factor. Clearly, that plays a huge part in everybody's day to day, no matter what you're doing at the moment. So the fact that you're experiencing that in academia is certainly a good thing. But more importantly, I think I really liked your point on collaboration. From a search firm's point of view, it's something that gets spoken about daily. No matter what seniority of position it is, no matter the functional area, collaboration is so important. So the fact that you experience that in a really good way in academia, I can imagine resonates really well. So all of that combines to give you a really good foundation going into industry that helps maybe make that transition quicker than it typically would be without having the experiences that you've had. Yeah, some really interesting points. Thank you for giving a bit more of a deep dive into that. Now, thinking about others, we're talking about collaboration here. What advice would you give to those who are considering a similar career, especially in how they position their experience to industry employers when they're, maybe thinking about interviewing or applying to move into industry?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think you should focus broadly on skills that translate. So again, we were talking about communication, management, problem solving, all of those things, and you can position your experience in like a broad way where you don't necessarily have to describe all of the technical aspects in detail. So, for example, in academics, I was able to improve a process for one of the junior members. By doubling her output because she was using a certain method where it was quite complicated. She had to go upstairs to a different laboratory. So first of all, it was about a timing, when she could use the piece of equipment upstairs, the machinery. And then it was very tricky to set up, lots of tubing and things, and then cleaning up as well. And her output was just all right. And then, I suggested a completely different method to achieve the same result. And it was so simple. It was just, taking a pot, adding A, B, and C, stirring it up, and it was done. So she thought that sounds very appealing. And best of all, she doubled her product. And, so there's just ways of helping people streamline and get more efficient. Why not, stretch your time, use the maximum, as if you can. And then, other advice is, you can look for opportunities to expand your skill set when you're in industry. Large companies, sometimes they have these 6-month sabbaticals where you can explore a different function. If you're interested in a different area, perhaps you can explore. And then in small companies, you can always ask to help out on small projects to get some exposure in a different area. And then these days, online learning courses are everywhere. There's so many websites that offer free training. LinkedIn is definitely one that does that. I've personally taken some marketing courses there. In order to learn more about terminology and marketing in general. And then, of course, joining a community like Women in Chemicals really helps. We're a global nonprofit organization. Our mission is really to create and identify opportunities to empower the women in, the chemical industry. It's just important for us to help women achieve their goals because we're only, 25% in the global chemical industry right now, and even less representation in key, leadership roles. So I think it works both ways for companies as well, because, companies with a more, gender diverse workforce are going to be earning, above average profitability. So I think it helps
Sure.
women as well as the employer. Yeah, and then we have so many various resources for women. We have like a Generation Female webinar series where we explore various topics like negotiation and having a growth mindset and networking and things like that. And then, of course, we have a mentorship program and global mixer pairing networking sessions, and just access to diverse range of companies because we're a global organization. So I guess we're just really a community that appreciates different perspectives, really trying to build relationships beyond
Mhm.
the job. And in my personal experience, I was a member and then I became part of the leadership team. And honestly, it's like a very genuine organization. We're very supportive of each other, uplifting. It's helped me as far as, looking for a new role and keeping up my skills and learning new skills. And so, I would just tell anyone, take advantage of, it's a free community. And you don't have to do everything. You can just pick and choose, according to your schedule, whatever works for you.
Great. Yeah, some really interesting advice there. And there's a few different angles that you attack that I really appreciated. And thinking about skill set being one of them and trying to make the most of the foundations you've laid, but how can you build upon that and how can you make that attractive to potential employers in industry? I think that's a really interesting point. But you're absolutely right. Community is a really key point here. And you gave a couple of figures and statistics there, which are still shocking to me. They're certainly going in the right direction, but this is one of the main reasons why we, as a search firm, wanted to partner with Women in Chemicals because there's still so much to be done. Diversity is a huge point. We know chemicals is super traditional in every sense of the word, and we want to change that along with your vision. So I would agree, community and having that access for people that have been through what you've been through is essential because there's such a variety of seniorities across the community that you can speak with people that have done this. You can speak with people that are currently going through it. And that diversity of thought is also so present, which is equally as important. We've led really nicely on to the last point, and I think potentially one of the most important. So I want to get your thoughts on diversity in academia compared to chemical industry. Like I said, chemicals it's improving. It's still nowhere where we want to be. But from what it sounds like from academia, it's actually quite diverse. So why do you think that strong diversity doesn't always translate into chemicals? I'm interested to hear some of your thoughts on it.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And, that's, to be honest, I'm not quite sure. But from my experience, what I've noticed is that, a lot of times people return to their home countries,
Mm,
or they want to go deeper into academics and become a professor, have their own research groups. And then I've noticed some people have had to retrain, perhaps due to health issues or maybe some other personal issue. And then sometimes I've noticed, there's lack of awareness around the many chemical paths in industry. And so, Women in Chemicals focuses on a podcast called Women of the Week, which is very popular and highlights, different career paths that women have
yeah.
taken. So that's like a very interesting one to tune into. But I don't know, I'm sure maybe you have some other ideas on why, the diversity doesn't always translate from academics to industry.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, isn't it? Because, how can you go from, I wouldn't say one extreme to another, but there's a clear divide between the two, and something's happening in between that's stopping the statistics reflecting in the same way. And from what I see in the industry, I think a big part to play here is the attraction. I think there's a big stereotype around chemicals that, we're living in the past from a sustainability point of view, from a diversity point of view, and that's not the case anymore. And I think what we often hear is that people don't see the chemical industry as a sexy industry. If we look at consumer, if we look at something like that, for example, there's a clear attraction there. So there's definitely more that needs to be done from the bigger players in the industry, but also people like us as a search firm, where we're speaking with leaders on a daily basis, and we need to relay that message that look, chemicals is trying to do just the same as every other industry. You know, most chemical companies are trying to be carbon zero by 2030. Sustainability is at the top of their agendas, and we are seeing more emphasis put on to diversity in all areas of the business, not only leadership but throughout. So I think that academia builds such a strong foundation, but perhaps other industries have done a better job at attracting them into that career path. So if they're sat there thinking, right, we have this great foundation, we have this amazing skill set, what direction do I go in? I feel like chemicals is quite low on that list. So I feel like there's more to be done to really pull people across. But what we do see is people that have made that transition into other industries and then join the chemical industry later on. When we're speaking with some of our clients and when we're going to market to find leaders, what we find is that when we ask them about what type of background they would like, there isn't enough emphasis on academia. So maybe self-consciously, and whether people know this or not, they're going to be viewed as more of a speciality than a commodity. No chemical pun intended there, but to go into another industry rather than chemicals. So it's a really, really interesting debate, and I think it's one that definitely needs to be studied further. But this is where women and chemicals come in, right? It's such a strong platform for people to really understand what the reality is and where we want to go to. So whether that's through all of the events you've just mentioned, whether it's coming into webinars or in-person events, having that exposure and hearing people go through it is going to be such a key indicator for people to want to do the same thing. You know, if you look up and see someone's been super successful by moving into chemicals and they've been trailblazers, I think that's really inspiring. So it's a shame it doesn't translate, obviously. But I've definitely seen improvements even over the past 5 years or so. But look, I really, really appreciated your insights. I won't keep you any longer, Pooja. I think it's a really important topic that we put out there, and hopefully people can gain some really good stuff. Not only people that are currently in academia looking to go into industry, but people that have done it and can hopefully, really relate to things that you've said. So thank you so much again for your time, Pooja. And
Thank you so
I wish you the
much.
best of luck moving forward.
Thank you very much.